In 1961, a farmer in western Iowa left 22 acres of trees standing. And every man at the grain elevator thought he had lost his nerve. Those trees did not fill a wagon. They did not show up on a yield sheet. They did not look useful from the road. But 20 years later, that same strip of timber would save his best ground, erase his debt, and prove that an entire county had been measuring the wrong thing. The farmer's name was Nathan Alder. He was 48 years old, quiet in the way older farm boys become quiet when they have spent most of their life listening to weather. He worked 380 acres outside a small town that had 2 churches, 1 feed store, 1 machinery dealer, and a grain elevator, where every strong opinion in the county eventually came to rest. Along the west edge of Nathan's place stood a crooked belt of trees, not a pretty grove, not a park, not the kind of timber people admired in photographs. It was a rough, uneven wall of bur oak, black walnut, hackberry, red cedar, and old hedge trees with thorns hard enough to ruin a tire. It ran along a rise where the wind came in first. 22 acres in all. Too much to ignore. Too much, people said, to waste. That was the word they used. Waste. In those years, the county was changing fast. Bigger tractors, wider planters, more fertilizer, more debt. Every farmer was being told the same thing in a dozen different ways. Clean up the farm, straighten the edges, remove anything that did not grow a crop. A tree row was no longer a shelter. It was an obstacle. A ditch was not drainage. It was missed acreage. A corner with brush in it was not protection. It was money trapped in roots. At the machinery lot in town, a salesman named Leonard Hale repeated the new gospel every Saturday morning. He had a voice made for counters and coffee pots, and he knew exactly how to make common sense sound like arithmetic. Land that isn't planted is land you're paying taxes on for nothing. Then he would point at the new 12-foot disc sitting outside in the dust. 1 clean pass, boys. Take out the brush. Square up the field. You can't bank shade. Men laughed because it sounded true. The extension office helped make it official. They printed neat bulletins with phrases such as field efficiency, productive conversion, and land use optimization. They never said a man was foolish for keeping trees. They did not have to. They simply showed what 22 extra acres could be worth if a farmer planted corn instead. At 90 bushels an acre and just over $1 a bushel, the calculation looked obvious. Nearly $2,000 a year, year after year, for doing what everyone else was doing. So the saws came out. First one hedgerow disappeared, then another. Then a whole farm changed shape in a single week. Its old windbreak burned in piles beside the road. Fields that had once been broken by dark lines of timber opened into long, flat sheets. From the county road, it looked cleaner, wider, modern. A man could stand by his pickup and see clear across ground that used to be interrupted by trees. Most people saw progress. Nathan saw exposure. He did not say it that way. He was not a man who used big words for simple weather. He only knew what his father had known. That tree belt had been left there after the dust years, when black dirt had once lifted off the fields and drifted into kitchen windows. Nathan's father had watched soil move like smoke. After that, he did not trust open ground. He fenced the western rise, let the old trees grow thick, and planted cedar where the gaps were too wide. When Nathan was a boy, he hated that belt. It stole sled runners, hid coon tracks, scratched his arms, and made the field bend where a straight row would have been easier. By the time he took over the farm, he had learned what the trees were doing. In winter, they caught snow. Not all of it, but enough. Snow drifted against the trunks and stayed there after the rest of the field had gone bare. In March, that drift melted slowly into the slope below it. In spring, the wind hit the trees before it hit the seedlings. The force broke apart in branches and came through tired. His rows did not whip as hard. His young corn did not sandblast itself against flying grit. In summer, the shaded edge held moisture longer. Birds nested in the belt and hunted insects along the rows. Leaves dropped every fall and thickened the ground beneath the trees, until the soil there smelled alive. Nathan did not call it a system. He did not call it conservation. He did not call it anything. He just watched it work. So when the county began cutting, he did not argue. He did not stand at the elevator and preach. He did not tell Leonard Hale he was wrong. He simply left the belt alone. That made him a target, though not a dramatic one. In farm country, ridicule often arrives as a smile. Men would lean against the grain elevator wall and ask when Nathan planned to join the new century. They asked if he was saving the trees for decoration. They asked if his tractor was afraid of shade. Nathan usually gave the same answer. Ground has more than one job. That line made people shake their heads, because it did not answer the arithmetic. Arithmetic was what everyone trusted. 22 acres times 90 bushels times $1 and change. That was a figure a banker could write down. Wind slowed by branches could not be written down. Snow held in March could not be written down. Topsoil not lost was invisible because it was still there. And in those years, invisible value had no defender. By 1965, nearly every farm around Nathan's had cleaned its borders. The old hedgerows were gone. Creek edges were shaved back. Corn ran closer to the road. Soybeans filled corners that used to hold rabbits and quail. The fields looked successful before the season even began. Nathan's farm looked old. A crooked green wall still stood on the west rise, and every spring his planter had to turn around it. Every fall his combine had to work around it. Every tax bill reminded him that land under trees was still land being taxed. His banker noticed. In 1967, Nathan sat across from Paul Mercer, the man who held the note on his farm. Paul had a clean desk, a careful tie, and the patient tone of a man trying not to insult a customer. "You're carrying almost 22 acres that could be row crop," Paul said. "At current prices, that's close to $2,000 a year before expenses. Maybe more if the market holds." Nathan looked down at his hat in his hands. Paul slid a paper across the desk. On it were columns: acres, yield, price, estimated return. It was not cruel. That made it harder. The paper did not mock him. It simply accused him. Paul tapped the last number. "You don't have to clear it all, but you ought to think about taking out the widest part." Nathan read the number twice. Then he folded the paper once, set it back on the desk, and said, "That belt is doing work I can't put in your column." Paul waited for more. Nathan had no more that would satisfy a bank. So he went home with the same debt, the same trees, and a heavier kind of silence. That was the first year he wondered if everyone else might be right. Not because he stopped trusting the land. Because pressure has a way of making a man suspicious of his own eyes. Everywhere he looked, cleared farms seemed to be moving faster. New equipment, bigger bins, more acres, straighter fields, cleaner edges. Men who had cut their trees talked as if they had found money hidden under the bark. Cade cleared 30 acres in a single fall. The following season, he bragged at the elevator that he had pulled an extra 2,500 bushels off ground his father had wasted on brush. Leonard Hale repeated that story for months. Roy quit farming around memories. Now he's farming acres. The men liked that. Nathan heard it from 3 different people before the week was over. That evening, he walked the tree belt until dark. The western sky had gone pale, and the wind was working through the cedar tips. Inside the belt, it sounded different, lower, broken into pieces. He stood beside an old walnut tree with a trunk wider than a barrel and pressed his palm against the bark. The bark was rough. The air behind it was still. The soil under his boots was dark and soft from years of leaves. Out in the open field, the wind scraped dust against the stalks left from harvest. Under the trees, the ground held. Nathan did not feel triumphant. He felt alone. The worst kind of doubt is not when strangers laugh at you. It is when the numbers make their laughter sound reasonable. Then the first warnings began, but they arrived too quietly to win an argument. A little soil gathered along fence posts where it had not gathered before. Low spots in the road ditch filled faster after a blow. On open farms, the top of a hill would look a shade lighter in April than it had in October. Men blamed the weather. Then they blamed a bad tillage pass. Then they blamed seedbed condition. Nobody blamed the missing trees. By 1969, the county soil reports began using careful language. Light wind movement, moderate surface loss, localized exposure. The words were soft, but the numbers were not. 2 tons per acre here, 3 there. More on the bare knolls when spring came dry and hard. Still, the cleared farms often produced enough to keep the old belief alive. Fertilizer covered weakness for a while. Better hybrids covered it longer. Equipment made the land look obedient, even when the land was beginning to thin. That was the dangerous part. The damage did not announce itself as disaster. It came dressed as maintenance. More fertilizer to keep the color. More insecticide when bugs pushed harder. More passes to break crusted ground. More fuel. More time. More cost. The extra acres were producing, yes. But they were also asking for more help every year. Nathan noticed the difference most clearly after snow. On his farm, white drifts gathered against the belt and lay in long banks down the protected side. When they melted, the soil below darkened slowly and held the water like bread, taking in milk. Across the road, the wind swept snow clean off the open fields. It piled instead in ditches, along fences, and sometimes clear across the gravel, where the county blade had to come through. The water was still falling from the same sky. It simply stopped landing where it could help. Insects changed, too. Without brush and trees, the birds thinned out. Not everywhere. Not all at once. but enough that men began talking about worms and beetles in a different tone. Sprays became more normal. Fields grew quieter. Summer evenings lost some of the motion that used to live along the edges. Nathan's belt stayed loud. Wrens in the hedge, crows in the walnuts, blackbirds lifting out of the corn, red-tailed hawk riding the air above the rise. The farm was not untouched by trouble. Nathan had weeds. He had wet springs. He had machinery repairs and market years that felt rigged against everyone. But his west fields held together. Then came the summer that settled the argument without asking permission. It was 1974. May came light on rain. June stayed mean. By July, the county had the color of old rope. On cleared ground, corn leaves curled by noon and sometimes never opened again before dark. Hilltops turned gray. Loose soil moved in every afternoon gust, lifting in thin sheets across the rows. You could see it from the road if you knew what you were looking at. The land was not just dry, it was unprotected. Roy Kincaid's place showed it first. His west field had been a showpiece after he cleared it. Long rows, no wasted turns. Good black ground, at least at the start. That July, it looked tired. Corn along the rise stood uneven. Some stalks were shoulder-high when they should have been over a man's head. The leaves had a blue, curled look that made every farmer uneasy. When Roy walked the field, dust slid around his boots. Across the fence, Nathan's protected field was no miracle. It was dry there, too. No miracle. It was dry there, too. Rain does not fall more kindly on stubborn men. But the corn stood darker. The leaves opened longer into the day. The soil between the rows stayed heavier. The western edge, the part nearest the trees, looked almost like a different season. At first people said Nathan had caught a stray shower. Then they checked the rain gauges. Same rain. They said maybe his soil was better. Then they remembered it was the same ridge. They said maybe he had put on more fertilizer. Nathan had not. By harvest, the difference had become too large to hide inside excuses. Several cleared fields came in under 55 bushels an acre. Some of the most exposed patches did worse. Roy's west field averaged 52. Nathan's protected field made 79. Not a record for the county, not a miracle. Just 27 bushels more than the farm across the fence. That number traveled faster than any joke had. At the elevator, men stopped mentioning Nathan's wasted ground. They did not praise him. Farm men are not quick to hand back 20 years of certainty. But the laughter thinned out. Arithmetic had acquired a second side. Leonard Hale still sold equipment. He still talked about efficiency. But he stopped using Nathan as an example. That fall, Roy Kincaid stood at the fence line between the two farms for a long time. On his side, the stalks were short and brittle. The soil had blown thin over the rise. On Nathan's side, the corn stubble stood heavier, and behind it the tree belt rose dark and rough against the sky. Roy did not cross the fence. He did not need to. A fence line can say things a neighbor cannot. The county did not change overnight. It never does. Men who had cleared ground could not put 20-year trees back by spring. Some planted grass strips. Some let brush return along creeks. Some did nothing and kept buying inputs, because regret does not make a payment. Nathan kept farming. He also kept walking the belt. By then he understood something more clearly than he had when the pressure began. The trees were not spare land. They were part of the equipment. Not iron equipment. Not equipment with a serial number or a loan attached to it. But equipment all the same. They caught snow. They slowed wind. They fed the soil. They housed the birds. They kept the farm from spending itself away, one invisible layer at a time. That would have been enough. But the trees had one more lesson left. In 1981, a timber buyer named Ellis Boone came through the county, looking for walnut. He had been told there was not much left. Most old belts and groves had been cleared years earlier. He drove gravel roads for 2 days, finding scattered trees, damaged trunks, small stands that had been cut too hard, and corners too young to interest him. Then he saw Nathan's West rise. From the road it did not look polished. It looked dense and stubborn, the same way it had always looked. But Ellis knew timber the way Nathan knew wind. He saw straight walnut trunks inside the rougher growth. He saw oak with clean lower stems. He saw 20 years of being left alone, when almost nothing around it had been left alone. He stopped at the house. Nathan found him standing near the belt, notebook in hand, looking up through the lens. "You selling any of this?" Ellis asked. Nathan said, "Depends what you think it is." Ellis walked the stand for nearly 4 hours. He marked nothing, cut nothing. He only measured, counted, and wrote. At the kitchen table that evening, he gave Nathan an offer. $96,000 for a selective cut. Not the whole belt, not even half of it. Just the mature walnut and a small number of oak, taken carefully, leaving the shelter intact. Nathan did not answer at first. He was thinking about the bank paper from 1967. The neat little column that had said the trees were costing him nearly $2,000 a year. 14 years at that number was $28,000. Now one careful cut was worth more than 3 times that. And the belt would remain standing. That was the part most people missed. The offer was not payment for destroying the system. It was payment from a system that had stayed healthy long enough to produce another kind of crop. Nathan did not sell that day. He made Ellis come back with a forester. He walked every marked tree. He argued over skid paths. He refused any cut that opened the west side too wide. He gave up money to keep the belt working. When the logging was done, the change was hard to see from the road. A few crowns were missing the road. A few crowns were missing. A few shafts of light reached the ground. The wall still held. With that money, Nathan paid down the note that had followed him for years. He repaired the machine shed roof. He replaced a failing corn crib. He bought less than people expected, because the lesson had gone too deep in him. He had spent 20 years being told that value had to be visible every harvest. The trees had answered in a slower language. They had paid first by keeping his soil, then by protecting his crop in a dry year, then by giving him timber without giving up the farm. One afternoon after the cut, Leonard Hale drove out. He was older then, or getting out of the pickup. The confidence had not vanished from him, but time had worn the sharp edge off it. He stood with Nathan near the west rise. For a while, neither man spoke. The wind was up that day. You could hear it moving over the open ground before it reached them. Then it hit the trees, broke apart, and softened. Leonard looked at the stumps from the selective cut, then at the standing timber behind them. "I sold a lot of discs telling men to take out rows like this," he said. Nathan watched the leaves move. "You sold what made sense from the road," he said. Leonard gave a small, tired laugh. "Saw something else?" Nathan shook his head. "I didn't see more. I watched longer." That was the difference. The county eventually found new words for what Nathan had kept. Shelter belt, windbreak, erosion control, wildlife corridor, soil protection, best management practice. The same thing that had once been called waste came back wearing official language. There were cost-share programs later, planting recommendations, maps with suggested windbreak locations, meetings where young experts explained why open ground needed protection. Nathan attended one of those meetings near the end of his farming years. He sat in the back and listened while a man half his age pointed at a slide and described how trees could reduce wind speed, retain snow, protect topsoil, and improve long-term yield stability. Nathan did not interrupt. He had no reason to. The farm had already made its case. By then, Roy Kincaid had planted a new windbreak on the same west rise he had cleared when he was young. The saplings were small. They would not help him much. Maybe they would help his son, maybe his grandson. That is the hard part about certain mistakes on land. The bill arrives before the repair does. Nathan retired in the late 1980s and passed the farm to his daughter. The West Belt stayed. Trees thickened again around the selective cuts. Birds filled the gaps. Snow kept banking against the trunks. The protected field kept holding darker longer into spring. Years later, people driving the county road still slowed when they reached that farm, not because it looked modern, because it looked intact. The lesson was never that every tree should stand, or that every acre should be left alone. Nathan was a farmer, not a museum keeper. He planted corn. He borrowed money. He worried over prices. He knew land had to earn. But he also knew earning was not always the same as producing. Some parts of a farm make money by filling bins. Some make money by preventing loss. Some pay in years when nothing else does. Some hold the line so the rest of the ground can keep working. The mistake the county made was simple. They measured the trees by what was missing underneath them. Nathan measured them by what remained because of them. And when the wind came hard across open farms, when the dry year exposed every shortcut, when the timber buyer finally put a number on what patience had grown, the old green wall answered every accusation without raising its voice. The most valuable machine on Nathan Alder's farm was the one nobody heard running, because it had roots instead of gears.